Welcome to CTV's Capital Dispatch with Rachel Aiello.
Hey, I'm Rachel Aiello, and welcome to this week's edition of Capital Dispatch. So a couple things happened on the Hill this week that I want to focus on. First, of course, obviously, all MPs have been seized with the latest developments in the Israel-Hamas war. MPs were off last week when the war broke out, so this week coming back to the Hill was their first chance to really have time in the House to debate it, and we saw that unfold on Monday. There was a special take-note debate in the evening. Preceding that, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau delivered a statement in the House of Commons condemning Hamas, calling for him to release the hostages, of which he said there might be Canadians. Right now, we're looking at about 2 reported Canadians that are still missing, 6 confirmed deceased. And it was an opportunity for MPs to express their condolences. We heard repeatedly the names of the Canadians that were killed stated in the House. It was also, I think, a moment for emotions to be let out. A number of MPs spoke to the fact that this is a war, this is a crisis, this is a horrendous situation that is playing out at home as well in Palestinian and Jewish communities in Canada. And throughout the week, those emotions and that tension and frankly, some division began to arise over this incident at a Gaza hospital. So the Prime Minister was quick to come out and condemn the situation. He was asked in the context then of what we thought was an Israeli airstrike. And the government hasn't since clarified their position. Israeli Defense Forces have come out and debunked this claim or say that they were not responsible for this, placing blame on another group. So we're still waiting to hear where the government stands on this. It'll be something we're watching into next week. So far, they just continue to implore all sides to respect international humanitarian law. They won't say if they think one side or the other has breached that. The humanitarian crisis in Gaza is worsening. So far, Canada has not been able to get any of its citizens out of that region. But over 1,000 Canadians now have been airlifted out of Israel. So we're watching to see how the Prime Minister responds. There's now Jewish groups calling for him to make clear that his condemnation of this attack was about the civilians killed and the tragedy of this and not necessarily placing blame one way or the other. Obviously, this is an incredibly sensitive, intense story, and we're trying to follow the nuance best we can from here, relying on our colleagues who are doing the work on the ground. The other story I wanted to highlight was the latest in this Canada-India debacle. So since the Prime Minister accused India of having a link to a killing of a Canadian on Canadian soil, diplomatic relations have been quite bad, but they've kind of reached a fever pitch now. Mélanie Joly came out on Thursday and said that 41 diplomats and their family members have been evacuated from the country, cutting our diplomatic contingent there to 1/3 of what it was. As a result, this is going to have impacts on consular services, Canadians in India being able to get the services they need. Joly was quite clear in her condemnation of India, saying this was unprecedented and going against convention, this decision to try to revoke diplomatic immunity from these diplomats. She said essentially, had they stayed in the country, they would have been at risk for arrest or other persecution. And the other little tidbit I wanted to know in terms of what happened this week was the AG came out with a round of reports. You know, every once in a while, she'll come out and say, hey, this department, that program isn't doing so well. She looked at a couple this last round, including how Canada is doing with its antimicrobial resistance. What is that? That is making sure we have the right antibiotics as Canadians and animals in this country and continue to increase their resistance to the antibiotics we've been taking for decades. And there needs to be some work there. A few other areas, immigration, processing needs some work. And our IT systems, the ones that deliver essential benefits like OAS and EI, are at risk of failure. So just a kind of little cap on the week there with this note from this watchdog saying, hey, federal government, you don't need a crisis to act. And these little drips and drabs of issues within federal departments are the latest examples of how they need to stay on issues and governance here at home while they are watching all of these fires abroad.
We know that short-term rentals through sites like Airbnb and Vrbo mean fewer homes for Canadians to rent and live in full-time, especially in urban and populated areas of our country. That is why our government is actively examining what options and tools exist at the federal level to ensure more short-term rentals are made available as long-term rentals, as permanent homes for Canadians to live in.
So that was Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland midweek making this announcement about short-term rentals. And why I wanted to highlight this as my quote of the week is because I think it's quite interesting. Like, could the federal government be moving to regulate short-term rentals? Is this another one of those attempts from them to grab onto the affordability issues, the housing issues that Canadians are seized with? If so, it'll be interesting to watch. But I also wanted to highlight it because I think it might be a little bit too little too late. This was a classic Chrystia Freeland. We're gonna, watch this space. We'll be having something more to say on this soon, but no actual substantive announcement in this commitment. Just essentially saying, hey, we're looking at this, potentially coming down on groups like Airbnb and VRBO. But I think we'll probably get more. My suspicion is in the fall economic statement, kind of like the mini budget that Freeland does in the fall. This would be, I think, to them a clear, easy win headline to try to make some gains out of that fall economic statement that might otherwise not be too exciting. But they have been warned about doing something with the sharing economy for years. I have it on good authority that it's been in transition books. They have been flagged, government departments, bureaucracy has flagged to the government that the sharing economy is really something we need to seize on. And so now coming around to, hey, maybe we need to do something in 2023. We'll be interested to see what they propose, if they propose anything, and how it goes over with Canadians. Okay, so what's on the agenda next week? Well, MPs are back in the House, and there's three things I'm watching. One is going to be continued debate on that housing and groceries affordability bill. The other is going to be there's a Bank of Canada interest rate announcement. Is it going to stay, hold, or decrease? With inflation cooling, some economists are suggesting now would be the time for the Bank of Canada to hold the interest rate. But the third thing I'm watching for, and the one that brought me the most procedural nerdy joy this week, was heckling in the House. So earlier this week, new Speaker Greg Fergus rose to try to talk to MPs about how heckling is bad and how in his new role he wants to try to get more serious about tackling it. But the timing of him raising this came right before question period, and that did not go over well with the opposition. The Conservatives, one by one, including Pierre Poilievre, rose to kind of chide the Speaker, wondering why he was putting off question period, this key accountability time in the House, in order to deliver this speech when he could have done it at any other point during the sitting day. But Fergus forged on. You can head to ctvnews.ca and read my full recap of this. But essentially, he said, I'm going to continue with my speech because heckling is bad. We need to respect each other. The decorum has gotten to a place in the House that is so unacceptable and unrespectful. Meanwhile, as he's saying this, MPs are heckling him. It was really a classic case of a bit of procedural shenanigans, a bit of a dust up in the House. And, while heckling can be an issue that merits serious discussion, amid all the other heavy news this week, for me, it was just kind of a nice reminder of some of the nerdier parts of being an MP and being on the Hill. So I'm watching that next week to see if Fergus's message resonates or if he's in for more heckling and the situation doesn't really get any better. We'll see. Thanks for watching.